We're going to try this. It's a PowerPoint, and I'm going to be speaking over, and hopefully you will be able to open it. And this presentation is going to be over the subject matter that we're going to be discussing the first week of school. You can find the materials on the Green Book window. It's chapters 10, 11, and 12. This is a PowerPoint on the merger rule, Shelley's rule, and Worthier Title. I'm not going to include in this presentation the rule against perpetuities, but we are going to be discussing the rule against perpetuities the first week that we're back. So please read the material. Understand this because most of the lecturing is done now. When we come to class, I'm going to have some problems. We're going to do some problems, but I'm not going to be discussing this in detail. So take time, read it, and learn it. We're not going to learn it in class. By the time you come to class, you should understand the material. So, without saying any more, let's start with the rule of merger. What is merger? Merger is a doctrine that combines, and here is the key, two or more vested interest. It's a lot loaded in there. Two or more vested interest. Right here, this little red sentence is packed with law that you have to memorize. Combines two or more vested interest when they come into the hands of who? The same person, and are not separated by a vested interest held by someone else. Again, you cannot do problems unless you understand the law. And right in this little paragraph, it's a lot of law. Into the hands of the same person and are not separated by a vested interest held by someone else. So, understand this before we proceed. If you have to stop the PowerPoint, stop it. Look at this definition and work it. And I'm going to give you some examples. Example 1 of merger. There is a possessory life estate, and remember when we did the little definitions on the PowerPoint, a reversion is vested, a right of re-entry is vested, a possibility of reversion is vested, present possessory interests are vested. So you have a possessory life estate plus a vested remainder in fee simple absolute. When these two follow, this is an example where two vested remainders follow each other. Or to A for life, then to B. Clearly, A has a life estate, B has a vested remainder. There's not a problem yet. The problem then becomes when A conveys it to B, because now B has a life estate and B has a vested remainder. So you have two vested remainders on the same person, and there's nothing in between. There's not another vested remainders in the hands of another person in between it. So in that case, the B, the life estate in B, which he gets after A conveys it to him, and the vested remainder in B merge, and what you have at the end is B has a possessory state in fee simple absolute. So when you have an exam question that says O to A for life, then to B, if we stop there, A has a life estate, B has a vested remainder. But if it says then A conveys to B, that changes everything, because you could say B has a life estate and B has a vested remainder. That is true. but because of the merger rule, that merges, combines, and what B really has is a possessory state in fee simple absolute. Example 2. You have a life estate and a vested remainder in fee simple absolute. Well, now when we look at this example, look at the difference. Is the same, but the difference is that this time it involves B conveying rather than A conveying to B. A has a life estate, B has a life estate which is vested. Remember, you have to review this now. Is this a remainder or is this an executory interest? Then to be for life, that's a remainder. Is it vested or contingent? It's vested. There is no condition precedent, and we know who B is. Then to C. In this case, it's not A conveying it to B. It's B conveying his gift to C. So what you have is, when B conveys it to C, C has a vested remainder in life estate, and C also has a following vested remainder. The two of them are combined, and the final result is A has a life estate and C has a vested remainder in fee simple absolute. This merges into this, and they both become one vested remainder in fee simple absolute. If you are confused now, stop and go back to the rule and read it. Non-merger. This is an example where you don't have the merger rule. A life estate, a contingent remainder, and a reversion. Your life estate is vested, the reversion is vested, but right in between is a contingent remainder. If that contingent remainder is in someone else, then there is no merger. In this case, O to A for life, then if B survives A, that's A. Then to B, if B survives A, well, that's a contingent remainder. But then A conveys to B, right? What's the difference between this one and the prior one? Well, this is vested. That's the difference. It's contingent. I'm sorry, it's contingent. Not vested, I'm sorry. That's the point is that if this was vested, that's a different story. But it's contingent. So A has a life estate, B has a contingent remainder, and when A conveys it to B, B has a vested remainder. There's a contingent remainder in between. It's not a vested remainder followed by another vested remainder. It's contingent. So therefore, the rule of merger doesn't work. So B has a possessory estate in life estate per ultra V. Review, why is that a life estate per ultra V? Because A conveys her life estate to B. That means that B would have a life estate as long as A is alive, so it's for the life of A. B has a contingent remainder because he's a contingent upon surviving A, so he has life estate and a contingent remainder, so O has a reversion, there is no merger. Here's another example of a non-merger. Example 4. Life estate, vested remainder in life estate, and a vested remainder in fee simple absolute. Let's see that as an example. O to A for life, then to B for life, then to C. I mean, this is basic states and future interest. If you follow my system, what does A have? Who gets it? A gets a life estate. Is there anything else limiting the life estate? No. Therefore, B gets a remainder, non-executory interest. Well, what kind of remainder is? Is it vested or contingent? Well, is then to be for life. So there's no condition precedent. It doesn't say that he has to survive. He just gets it for life, and then to C. So it's a vested remainder followed by a vested remainder. This one is a vested remainder in life estate. It's a vested remainder in fee simple absolute. But look what happens now. A conveys to C. So the bottom line is, when A conveys it to C, this is what we have. C has a possessory estate in life estate because A gave it to C. B has a vested remainder in life estate. And C has a vested remainder in fee simple. When you look at this carefully, you will see that you have C as a vested remainder, C has a vested remainder. The problem is that that vested remainder and that other vested remainders are separated by B. If you look at the rule, it says that they cannot be separated by a vested remainder in another person. That's the problem here. So let's see an example that will kind of use 3 and 4 here, and we compare them. Merger. Here's a contingent remainder, and yet the merger rule applies. Well, life estate with a contingent remainder in between, vested remainder in fee simple absolute. What A has a life estate, which is the life estate. B for life, if B survives A, that's a contingent remainder in life estate. Then to C, that's vested. So technically, you have a contingent remainder between the two vested. However, the rule that we had in 3, what you have here, if you look at the merger rule, it says a vested remainder followed by a vested remainder. In this case, what you have is a vested remainder subject followed by a contingent remainder. How is that different than number 5? Well, you look at 5, you have a contingent remainder and a vested remainder, but when A conveys it to C, when A gives a life estate to C, now you have a vested remainder followed by a contingent remainder and a vested. That contingent remainder, because it is between the two, gets destroyed. If it was a vested remainder, it would not get destroyed. If it was a vested remainder in another party, that would not be a merger. But in this case, because it is a contingent remainder, it gets swallowed by the two vested remainders. So, O to A for life, then to B for life, if B survives A, then to C. A has a life estate, B has a contingent remainder, C has a vested remainder. When A conveys the life estate to C, right, then C has a life estate, B has a contingent remainder, and A and C has a vested remainder. Because this is a contingent remainder, it gets destroyed. Whereas if this was a vested remainder, it would not. The destruction of contingent remainders. A contingent remainder is destroyed if it's still contingent when the prior estate ends. Let's look at it. O to A for life, then to B if B reaches the age of 30. When A dies, B has never reached the age of 30, so it was still contingent. Therefore, that gift is destroyed, as is his contingent remainder. What's left is a fee simple in the grantor, the reversion. A died, she's not there anymore. B did not meet the condition. When A died, B was still contingent. 29 for him to vest. It should have been 30. Since he's not 30, that goes out. She has a possessory estate in fee simple. Let's take this example and let's suppose that B now reaches the age of 30. At that point, the contingent remainder becomes vested because he met the condition. So when A dies, B had a vested remainder, so B gets the possessory estate in fee simple. Is the contingent remainder not is still contingent when A dies, therefore is destroyed. Some jurisdictions, there is no destruction of contingent remainders. We have spoken about that in class. they would actually call it an executory interest. But the majority rule is this. Let's talk about Shelley's rule. Here's the rule. If in the same instrument, a remainder is given to a life tenant heirs, you give the remainder to the life tenant. Once you do that, you check to see if there's a merger. Always do that, because that's how you get taken or tricked in a question. You come out, use Shelley's rule, you give the remainder to a life tenant, and then you leave it there when you needed to go one more step and follow the merger rule. So you always have to follow through and make sure first, does Shelley's rule apply? If it does, then you give the remainder to the life tenant. When the remainder is given to a life tenant's heirs. At that moment again, you give the remainder to the life tenant. At that moment, you check to see if there's a merger, because you have a life tenant, which is the same person as a remainder. But start like this. Remainder is given to a life tenant's heirs. It doesn't say and his heirs, because whenever you see and his heirs, that's simply telling you it's a fee simple. It's given to the heirs. So let's look quickly at some examples. All to A for life, then to A's heirs. It's clear. You have here a life tenant with a remainder to A, the life tenant's heirs. It doesn't say then to A and his heirs, right? That's different than to A's heirs. So what do we have here? A has a possessory estate in life estate, and A has a remainder in fee simple absolute. Again, because of Shelley's rule, you give the remainder to the life tenant. So A has a life estate and A has a vested remainder. But look, now A has a possessory estate in life estate and A has a vested remainder in fee simple absolute. So A has two vested interest. What does that sound like? Vested interest following on the same person with the remainder? Merger rule. So if you apply the merger rule to this, A has a possessory estate in fee simple absolute. Clear? You can see that. No application. All to A for life, then to B's heirs. What does the rule say? You have to give the remainder to the life tenant's heirs. In this case, she's giving the remainder not to her heirs, but she's giving the remainders to B's heirs. No Shelley's rule. All right, let's try to apply Shelley's rule. Here's an example, and let's see if we can apply it. All to A for life, then to B. Then B conveys to A's heirs. See the difference from this one from the previous ones. In this case, what you have is B conveyance to A's heirs is not in the same instrument. According to Shelley's rule, the gift had to be to A's heirs in the same instrument. In this case, B's conveyance to A's heirs is a different instrument. How would this look like in the same instrument? All to A for life, then to A's heirs. That's the same instrument. In this one, they gave it to B, and then B conveyed it to A's heirs. It's not the same instrument. So you can see Shelley's rule does not apply. A has a possessory estate in life estate. A's heirs have a contingent remainder in fee simple absolute. And the grantor this time is not O, is B. So B has a reversion in fee simple absolute. Shelley's rule applies only if a remainder is given to a life tenant's heir. This is kind of an exception or an extension of the rule. The rule does not apply if an executory interest is given to a life tenant's heirs. Shelley's rule only applies if a remainder is given to a life tenant's heirs. The rule does not apply if an executory interest is given to a life tenant's heirs. That's the rule you see here. So let's look at an example. O to A for life, then 1 day after A's death to A's heirs and their heirs. So let's do this my way. Who gets it? A. What does A have? A life estate. Is there anything else that is a condition on this life estate that could terminate it except A dying? No. Therefore, what follows in A's heirs and their heir is a remainder. So is it vested or contingent? But here we see that there's a gap, right? So it's not a remainder because there is a gap. A's heirs and the heirs will have to wait 1 day. So what's going to happen during that day? It's going to go back to the grantor. The grantor has a reversion, and then 1 day after springs back to A's heirs and their heirs. Therefore, it's an executory interest. Shelley's rule applies only if a remainder is given to a life tenant's heirs. It doesn't apply if an executory interest is given. So this looks like a remainder, but it's not because there's a gap, 1 day. So since Shelley's rule doesn't apply, A has a life estate, O has a reversion in fee simple subject to an executory limitation. A's heirs have a springing executory interest in fee simple. Life tenants must hold the remainder. If any other relative or individuals hold the remainder, the rule does not apply. O to A for life, then to A's children and their heirs. Well, this is more than that. First of all, it's not to A's children heirs. So to begin with, it doesn't fit the rule. But secondly, the remainder is not held by the life tenant. The remainder is held by A's children. So Shelley's rule does not apply. I'm going to stop here. And I said I was going to discuss Worthier Title, but I'm going to leave that for class because I believe that Shelley's rule and the merger rule is probably going to take us a day or two. So please read the chapter and be ready to discuss Worthier Title and the rule against perpetuities. So that's your assignment for the first week. Please come prepared. You should know Shelley's rule well. You should know the merger rule well and know how to apply it. And we're going to find out somewhere by having a little practice clicker test. See you in class.